shit on that legacy, you know, if that makes sense. But yeah, like, and I think if anybody has like maybe more reason to have sour grapes, it'd be David Vincent, you know, because you're looking at the guy who takes, ends up taking your place, so he might have a little more right to say some negative stuff. But even David Vincent, I've never really heard him say anything negative or like really, really mean about Steve Tucker. But he might have been like, well, look, there's only one. It's like the David Lee Roth situation. It's like there's only one singer of Van Halen, that's David Lee Roth, and there might be kind of one of those things where it's like, man, there's only one Morbid Angel singer, David Vincent. But
I don't know if I'd go that far into it, but I mean, it's not even that big of a deal, really. But I mean, to me, that's Morbid Angel is David Vincent, and like I said, that's all it is. It's nothing about the guys and their personality. Although you're right, there is a mystique with David Vincent. But there is, on the other hand, the other guy doesn't have that. And their music, to me, I'm sorry, just sounds like immolation, like standard, average American death metal without David Vincent there.
I don't know.
Album, but I'm going to listen to it. But
yeah, you're going to listen to it, and you're going to... I think if you actually do listen to it objectively, and I'm not, I don't want to like try to force an opinion into you, big fat hard opinion into you, but I think I think Trey Azagthoth is Trey Azagthoth no matter who's doing the vocals, and I think he's for better or worse, I mean he drives that sound, you know what I mean? It's not like his style changed with Steve Tucker, like he still plays Trey Azagthoth riffs. I mean, there's still these twisted, weird, I don't know, hard to define kind of riffs that nobody else does. And if anything, I think Immolation kind of borrows from Morbid Angel.
Totally, all those bands do. Which is funny because I really like Morbid Angel's first few albums, but all these other American bands like Malevolent Creation and Suffocation and Immolation just totally do not interest me at all. Not even their first albums. And you know me, I'm a first album kind of guy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Immolation just does not do it for me. I mean, I hate to keep picking on them. I'm sure they're...
I know, that's like your go-to band of...
Well, they are, because everybody touts how great they are. And like, to me, I'm sorry, it's just average standard death metal with lots of solos. It's not that interesting. Like,
great, but
there's nothing going on there. It's just...
Well, I think, maybe I look at bands like that in the sort of historical perspective is when you think of like the origins of American death metal, I would say Immolation is part of that, part of the foundation.
One of the first bands, like I'd say
Morbid Angel, Obituary, Deicide.
Morbid Angel is probably, I'd say, the first one to break really big. Then you had like Obituary and Cannibal Corpse, and here's a fun one for you: is Immolation actually sent a demo to Earache, and they were gonna get signed. Earache wanted them, but they never answered their mail. Like, the dudes never answered their mail. And they were like, okay, well, we tried. And I know this because I saw the letter. It was, I used to trade with other labels, and there's a label in Spain called Repulse Records. I used to trade with that guy, and he put out Immolation's demos and stuff on a CD, and I got that CD in. There was like a little photo collage, and one of them was the letter to Earache. Like, Earache, really? Like, hey, we want to sign you, fucking talk to us. And they never did. It never happens.
Really?
Yeah, totally. And that's funny because I think at that time, Earache was putting out anything, and I would love all of it, even stuff that wasn't metal. Like, they put out this thing called Mighty Force, which was this techno industrial thing at the time, like industrial.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that great, but because it was on Earache, I was like, oh yeah. But I liked industrial music already, but I was like, oh, this is good. So I wonder if I would have been more fair to Immolation had they been on Earache, but I don't know, because like I said, they...
Yeah, and it's funny because I think there's a little bit, and I don't mean this necessarily as a negative thing, but I think a lot of what's coloring your opinion of some of these bands isn't necessarily the music. It's more of origins and maybe I don't
But
know, just where they fit in the vibe of things, you know, like
I can't disagree with that, but I also have to say that I don't know. It maybe something to do with Earache and their production, and like maybe they would like co-produce the album because they did that with a lot of bands, even American bands. Digby Pearson, Dig from Earache would travel.
mhm.
So he produced that album, I think, or like there were a couple other bands where he had hands-on production values, and that's what I'm thinking is maybe Immolation would have come across a lot more extreme at that time. And then the same thing, like Suffocation, their first release was like really heavy. It was like super heavy, faster, a lot less of the guitar stuff, and so I probably would have been geared to like it. But by the time that record really came out, it was like years later. It came out during the big Florida death metal boom after the Entombed thing, the Swedish death metal, and that's when all the bands were on Roadrunner, basically, like Suffocation and all those bands, Gore Guts.
Yeah, and I guess I sometimes wonder if okay, so I sometimes wonder if kind of like the scene allegiance colors your opinion. I mean, you kind of throw your lot in with the European, like the Swedish death metal,
Not
right?
so much the Swedish. I mean, I was more into that than I was the American because it was still heavier. But it got boring too because it was all the same, like super high end. Everything's turned up all the way, fucking heavy as shit. That got boring after a few songs, especially
Mhm.
after a few bands. So
Right. Yeah, and I
a lot
think that's
of European death metal bands, like England had some really different sounding ones. There was a lot of stuff in Denmark, and
well, yeah, like Bolt Thrower from England, right?
of course, Bolt Thrower, Benediction, Prophecy of Doom was a band from England that was really good. They didn't get quite as known, and a lot of other small time bands like Malediction, Desecrator, all these bands from England that were
Mhm.
great. They just didn't make it. But here's a funny aside. Speaking of bands who were almost going to be on Earache, did you know Burzum also was going to be on Earache?
No, but I could kind of see them flirting with the idea.
Well, they were really they missed the entire black metal scene because of what happened with Burzum. They thought all black metal was racist. And I guess at that time, he was in rare form doing his Nazi thing, trying to get attention with that. So they met in
Yeah.
England. They took him out to pizza. They were going to put out his record, whatever one it was at that time. I think his third or fourth one. And I guess he spouted off this extreme Nazi shit, trying to be hardcore to the Earache Records guys, looking like a badass. And they were turned off by it completely. So that, yeah, no thanks. And then they just assumed all black metal was like that. So they completely missed
Mhm.
the entire black metal spectrum that whole time it was out, and that was why.
Yeah, it seems like Burzum ruined it for a lot of people.
He really did.
Yeah.
He painted a really bleak, melancholy black metal atmosphere, and it was really great and really somber. Really captured a real mood there. But of course, he ruined it for a lot of people by doing that,
Mhm.
because then it would split people. Like some people were into it and they were trying to be Nazis, and there were other bands who weren't into it at all, and there were people like me who just originally liked the stuff kind of in the first place, and then was like, well, shit, what do I do? I mean, I like the music, but do I still support this band? And that's actually a huge topic we're going to have to cover someday at length,
Right. Right,
which we
because
won't get into now. But
well, and I mean, just kind of a thought on that is because, you know, one of the benefits I'd say of like extreme metal, you know, particularly like maybe death and black metal is it gives you you know, it's sort of that kind of a union, like Carl Jung kind of concept of the shadow self, right? We all have this monster inside of us. We're all capable of just committing the most horrible acts and of hate and violence. And I think metal explores those kind of topics and those scenarios and gives you a way to sort of look at that, you know, and sort of feed that sort of, you know, bad part of all of us. You know what I mean?
well,
With
it's your
without hurting
darkness.
anybody.
You're attracted to the darkness of things, and like I said, like some people like movies about women falling in love with men. Other people like movies about people being torn apart by demons from hell. You know,
Right, right. And
the
you
thing
know,
about too
it's not
though is
saying
like
you want that to happen in real life. maybe you do, but
Oh, no, no, not really. I don't see pleasure in being torn apart, even though they say it's really awesome in the movies, in the Hellraiser movies.
yeah,
But the music lyrically isn't about that, and there are bands who do that. Now, on the other side, the flip side, you have Carcass, whom we were actually talking about on this show,
right.
and they're not militant vegetarians and vegans, but they certainly preach it. And all at the time when there were four members, two of them were vegetarian, the other two were vegan, and they weren't telling you like, hey, you better do this or it's wrong or fuck you. They were just saying, hey, look at this disgusting album cover with human body parts, and there's also animal parts. Are you hungry
Mhm.
for a steak? Okay.
Yeah.
No, good.
Yeah, and that's I think a good way to approach, like any kind of message you want to send, and then on the flip side, a band like Cannibal Corpse is just pure fantasy. Like, okay, this is basically a zombie horror fiction, you know what I mean? Set to music.
Cannibal Corpse, and again, like I said, they're lyrically, visually, like everything, like even musically to a degree. I think they're like the kind of thing you'd see high school kids doing.
Yeah,
Like
I mean it
everything's gore, like to the extreme. Everything's like absolutely over the top. Everything's like sexual.
right.
It's not just gore bands and American death metal bands. If you're dealing in black metal, there's like an underground, like black metal is split off into all these different categories too. There's one called war metal,
Mhm.
where every band around is copying like a few bands who started this back in the 90s, where everything is about war. There's always goats. There's always sodomy is somehow related to it. There's always a naked chick getting her head torn off with big tits, but or being fucked by some giant muscular goat creature, and everything's like war goat sodomy cult ritual and all that kind of shit. I'm like, it's so dumb. I'm like, shut up. That's almost as bad as like the worst gore metal band, like worst songs, like their worst lyrics. It's just so stupid. And you have people, of course, because of the black metal ethos, who take that so fucking serious. Like they're absolutely
Mhm.
100% serious about this. And you're like, no, you're not. Fuck you. You're not serious. So suck my dick. You
Yeah.
party, you laugh, you tell jokes. Fuck off. You're not
Yeah.
serious about war goat sodomy cult ritual. Fuck you. And that whole thing started from the Norwegian black metal scene from Euronymous, trying to make everybody all serious and dour and not have fun. That's all that was. That's where this whole mythos of black metal comes from. That's why. That's it. Fuck you if you don't like it. I'm woke as fuck too. I don't like racism, but I'm not going to condemn people for liking Marduk or whatever. It's just stupid. But and like Carcass, I love Carcass, but sorry, I still eat meat.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Their album covers did not turn me off of you know, nice piece of Kobe beef, flopping around on my plate.
Yeah, that was kind of their idea, is to make people think, and that's what they said. They were never out to like actually change it. And my thesis on that has always been, if you're that adamant that people should think the way you think, then why are you fucking playing in a band? If you're that punk as fuck, you should write a book or buy some cable access time or run for fucking office. Like, what are you wasting your time playing in a band for? Like, no
I
one
don't know.
cares about your lyrics at the end of the day. They just like music.
If you ask me, I'd rather them play in a band than do anything where they actually might be effective. Whatever keeps them away from creating policy, I think is the best option.
And as we've seen, celebrities should not be involved in legality, but
Yeah, I I'm on the fence on that. I think if you have a platform that reaches a lot of people and you have an opinion, might as well go for it. But that's you're gonna get a lot of bad ideas out there. But I would never tell Ted Nugent to shut his mouth. Keep going, whatever. If you have the ability to speak, go for it.
Ted just represents those truck driving guys you see that just they hate Obama just because he's black and whatever. That's just. But I
I
still
don't
like Ted
I
Nugent.
don't believe that.
No,
Yeah, no, I don't think
that's the kind of guy he is. He's like into some of that crazy like radical right wing shit. I mean,
yeah, maybe. I mean, but when he talks politics, it kind of sounds like that. But when you hear him
that,
talk about his musical influences, he worships Motown. James Brown, like
Oh,
he'll
I'm not saying he's a Nazi or anything, or a racial, like a KKK guy. I mean, he's just, I'm just sick of that too. Like, I remember a long time ago when Kiss put their makeup back on in the 90s.
Mhm.
It was actually the farewell tour. I went to see that. Ted Nugent was opening,
Was he?
and I'm like, okay, cool, Ted Nugent, and he's playing like some of his stuff, and then all of a sudden he starts going off on Janet Reno and all this shit. I'm like, what the fuck? And at that time, I didn't give a fuck about politics. I was like, whatever. Janet Reno, isn't that old lady? Like, who, what? And
Yeah,
he
yeah,
goes off, and like he's been doing it ever since. But whatever. I don't care. I don't follow Ted
yeah.
Nugent in real life. I just like his music. Same
I do
thing.
too. Well,
That,
and I'm glad that you like his music because I've always argued, and people would just jump down my neck, that I think Ted Nugent basically laid the foundation for thrash metal.
why do you
I
think
think
that?
because like he was writing riffs that sound like almost like proto thrash riffs in the fucking 70s, dude. He had that sort of double picking technique that you hear like almost all the time in thrash. So I think he's directly uh almost responsible for the thrash sound. No one will admit
I
it.
don't know if I would agree with that. That seems like a bit of a stretch, but
Not like from a technique standpoint. I'm not saying like he wasn't playing like the same kind of like riff progressions, but there's a certain riffing technique that he has that you hear almost exclusively in thrash. And I just know Ted Nugent was doing that.
are we talking American thrash, like Bay Area, or are we talking about
Probably,
European? Or
well, we'll just say probably Bay Area is most likely, but
no, that's where you lose me. I'm not a big fan of that sound either. But once again, European. But
yeah, Jesus, man, this isn't working out.
well, you know what? I got into thrash when it came out. It was Metallica, and I know, and like
Yeah,
we discussed also earlier last week or the week before, it's always another band that inspires the guys from Europe, and that band's from America. And then the European guys do it, and they become the big figurehead like Venom and Motorhead. And then they
mhm.
inspire all these other bands. So then you have Metallica, but Metallica broke big. So there you go. I mean, Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, Slayer, the big four. Like I liked all of them when they came out, but by the time everybody else got into Metallica, you had jocks at school getting into Metallica now after the and Justice for All, and I was like, yeah, I don't think so. I'm done with this. Because that album was a
Yes.
letdown to me. And then like Slayer had South of Heaven, so that was kind of like wishy-washy compared to Rain and Blood. Megadeth was already like way off the charts for me because they stopped thrashing and started doing more of the solos. And Anthrax got into rap, so I was like, God damn! When I find new music, it's like it gets fucked up. So then, of course, I discovered Creator, Sodom, Destruction, and Tankard, and all this other stuff,
Yeah.
Death Row, and I'm like, fuck yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, I could kind of see like getting turned off by like certain cultural phenomena that will start to glom onto to bands and genres. It makes it kind of easy to want to dismiss it. Like I'll admit, like I don't feel that way about Megadeth and Slayer and Metallica, but there was a bit of like I really liked
Hard.
Pantera's Cowboys from Hell. Because I really liked Pantera, the Cowboys from Hell album.
No, I hate Pantera. Sorry.
Yeah, well, and I kind of wrote them off when the sort of culture that was created by their music, I guess, like this sort
Well,
of
that too. Yeah, that.
meathead sort of kind of thing, and I had to sort of get that out of my head because once again, like the reason I'm into all of this is strictly the sound, the sonics of it. I don't care what's going on really around it or who's listening to it. So I've been able to actually revisit some of the Pantera albums and kind of get into it. But you know, I do understand that sometimes they create this sort of vibe or sort of stereotype listener
Well, there is
that
that. I think musically, also for me, like you have to think that Pantera, at the time that Slayer was coming out, Pantera weren't even around, but then later on they were, but they were a glam band. Everybody knows that.
Yeah, they were kind of more.
So they came out with that moshy, riffy shit like around the time Slayer was hugely popular, and they started hanging out with Slayer.
Mhm.
And then they suddenly had tattoos and all that stuff. And they were, instead of Diamond Daryl, it was Dimebag Daryl. I'm like, okay, whatever. But I didn't like it. It just didn't appeal to me. I was already into heavier stuff. That's the thing.
Mhm.
Because overseas in Europe, they were already on to like some kick-ass shit. Like here, people were catching on the shit that was hit 10 years ago. So you just
Well,
have Metallica breaking out, but you've already had Venom and all these other bands and Sodom and stuff doing that already in Europe for a couple of years. They just made a more marketable package over here in America, you know. And it's funny too because I actually think we should do a show on Metallica because
oh yeah,
Ride the Lightning is such a great album. I love that record. It's like easily one of my top 5 thrash albums, top 10 heavy metal albums of all time. Fucking
oh
great
yeah,
album.
oh yeah. It changed everything. It was a game
That's the
changer
first
for sure.
thrash record I heard right there. I was in the record bar in ZCMI Center, downtown Salt Lake, 1985. We're in there looking for whatever. I'm like, oh man, I wonder if the new Dio's out. I'm just like looking for whatever heavy metal I can find that hasn't turned to glam yet. All of a sudden, this acoustic guitar comes on. I'm like, what's this shit? Put on some metal. And then the riff came on. Oh, fuck, what is that?
Oh yeah, dude. It was like nothing else. You know, they definitely laid pretty much. Yeah, they pretty much changed everything at that point. You know, everything was like trying to top that album. You know, every thrash band after that was like, basically, we got to be heavier and faster than Ride the Lightning, because that was the benchmark. You know.
They do. And then you had Slayer come out, but they were so dark with dark subject matter, it didn't quite resonate with as many people, but it would a few years later. But then,
Man, that band scared me.
what?
I
Slayer?
remember, I remember being like 9 years old, and I was at Starbound Records. Do you remember Starbound?
I do. I bought quite a lot of good music at
Yeah,
Starbound.
that was a great store. I remember picking up Hell Awaits, the album cover, and just staring at it for like 20 minutes, just kind of mesmerized, but just terrified too. Just like, I don't think I dare. I will never listen to this, but I can't stop looking at the album cover. I'm hypnotized by it.
I
Yeah.
don't really think, I think Slayer for me, it was actually going back to Carcass, the topic of this show. That's the one who did that to me. Like, I was like, man, and just looking at these people and like, you don't want to look at it. It's revolting, but at the same time, you can't not because you're like, God, look at this. Like, what is this? Plus, the way they arranged it, it was just like they did this cut and paste thing, or you had this like random, who knows what this is, like
Mhm.
pile of gore coming out of the mouth of this cadaver that was like just staring off into space, and just all kinds of crazy shit. There were dead babies. There was like animal parts on the second album. And I could
Right.
swear that Earache, I don't know if I can prove this ever, but I could swear that they had a light dusting of formaldehyde on the LP version of Symphonies of Sickness, the second Carcass record.
Really, like, so you could actually wake up and smell the carcass, as they say.
I'm telling you, and I know what formaldehyde smells like because my sister is a doctor and she used to bring home like stuff. Like one morning I was going to school and she had a fucking skin cat in a plastic bag. I
Yeesh.
set my books down in the garage and like picked them up again. I like, what's this? I pick up this plastic bag. There's a fucking cat in there, like this damn
Yikes.
skinned alive. But I remember the smell. And I'm like, what's that smell? It was like it reminded me of dead things forevermore when I was a young kid. She said that's formaldehyde. It preserves stuff that's dead so that I can dissect it. I'm like, oh,
Yeah, that's nasty stuff.
Carcass, the first few vinyl releases of that had something in there because it smelled like that, unless it was just a total trick of the plastic or the paper or the ink. But I could swear that it smelled like formaldehyde, and that really made that album that much more nauseating because it gave you that reality check kind of smell
Mhm.
as well as the visuals and the lyrics. And that's why, to me, like Cannibal Corpse and all these other bands will never come close lyrically. Like Tunneling Through the Guts,
Mhm.
it's enough to drive you nuts. Yeah, cool lyrics.
What is that? Well,
Chronic necropsy and devourment. I mean, come on, which one are you gonna?
once again, I mean, call me weird, but like, lyrics are very much like kind of secondary to me when it comes to death metal. I'm really just which is probably why, I mean, Cannibal Corpse could be singing about anything. One, I wouldn't really be able to, you can't really understand the lyrics, but I wouldn't be like pissed off that like, oh, they're writing about puppies. Sucks. No, because it's the music, man. Like it's all about the sonics for me, So that's why I think I can, and maybe that's another thing that kind of what makes me and you a little bit different is I think you're really into like
I'm actually not a lyrical person at all. I don't give a shit about bands' lyrics and stuff. But I'm just saying, in terms of Carcass, like you can't compare that to Cannibal. And the only reason probably why I'm so on about this is I've done a radio show like right at the time Grindcore was up and coming. I was so moved by it that I just volunteered to do a radio show on a real radio station. And people would always call up and like they couldn't get past Cannibal fucking Corpse when they came out. I'm like, why are you so into this? It's like the music is inferior to Carcass, the lyrics, the album covers. It just drove me nuts. And the same with Slayer. It's like, why the fuck do you want? And then Deicide later. It's like, why Deicide? What about Morbid Angel? Fuck, come on. And like, that's all they cared about because it's American bands that are exposed in their face in the record stores where they can find it easily. They didn't seek out Carcass and Morbid Angel like I did. You had to go to specialty record stores to get that shit or send overseas and wait 8 weeks for it to show up. Carcass.
Morbid Angel was the first one to be on a major label, though. Didn't they sign with Atlantic or
Giant Records, I think, which was a sub label, but like lyrically, like I cared to a point, but like I never like got into the movements of what certain bands were talking about, like Carcass. I was never a vegetarian, I never will be, but Cannibal Corpse's lyrics are sort of lowbrow and I know they're not trying.
They're very lowbrow.
It's like whatever. It's just like we're being silly and gory, over the top, ridiculous, but
I think their music, if you just speak of it in just terms of musicality and technical ability, I think Cannibal Corpse is actually very highbrow musically.
You think?
I wouldn't listen to Cannibal Corpse if their music wasn't just so good, like it's.
Well, that's weird to hear you say that because to me, like Cannibal Corpse, like all they're doing is just throwing out riffs and solos all over the place. That's what it sounds like to me, and
and I think it could sound like that.
It's just like all the songs are like riff. Start out with a riff, da 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 da, and then the drums come in, and then it's like riffing and solos, and then that's it. You have Carcass does all this other crazy stuff like double bass or a drum solo to start the song, or this grindy bass sound, or just all this different stuff. But all the Cannibal I've heard up to that point was like it's the same thing. Every song, like fifth song on side 2, da 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 solos, and like okay, it's the same as all the other songs they just played.
Welcome to death metal, JR.
Not though. I'm telling you, like we're talking about this. Every song on Symphonies of Sickness, which is the blueprint for death metal, alongside Morbid Angel, Altars of Madness, every song is different, and you can pick out each one.
Yeah.
Not only that, but the other thing I loved about Carcass and all these early bands was they came from the punk scene, and they were all at that time in the UK kind of like influenced by bands like Extreme Noise Terror. So they had 2 different vocalists, maybe 3 in some cases, which in Carcass's case on their first album anyway. So you had a low vocalist, a high vocalist, and that made it more interesting instead of just the same guy over and over and over. And that's another reason why Cannibal and all those other bands lose me, is because it's just death metal. It's just the same shit over and over.
Yeah, I love
Unless it's really super distinctive, like Hawthorne of Bathory, Celtic Frost, and even Kiss. You have 4 different people doing vocals, and they were inspired by the Beatles to do that, who are from where? England. So there you go. Back to merry old England.
It all starts in England.
It sure did.
And you can definitely hear some of the Beatles' influence in Cannibal Corpse, especially in Blunt Force Castration. There, you can kind of hear a little bit of that "I Want to Hold Your Hand." I'm just kidding, dude.
You're a fun guy.
Yeah.
Oh, girl, I tell you something. Stripped, raped, and strangled.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
it's a love song.
And here's another thing too, really quick too, is like the thing that proved to me that American bands like that kind of didn't really quite get it is they would do a cover song. There was when Tomb of the Mutilated came out. I was at the radio station. I played it all the way through for all the people who wouldn't leave me alone. There was a single EP that came out too.
Yeah,
That got sent to the radio station. They
it was
covered
the Hammer Smash Face EP.
the EP, but they covered
Zero to Hero.
Zero the Hero and I think something by Possess, but they did it with their death metal vocals and everything. It just sounded like another Cookie Monster death metal song. You couldn't tell what they were doing. Which that, if you're really going to be a band, like, why not, if you're going to do a cover of a song, do it that way or put your own unique spin on it. But that was just a boring death metal song. It was.
I think what me and you need to do one of these days, and it wouldn't be like a radio show, we should sit and listen. Yeah, like listen to, and like kind of make the case, because to me it's like like I would want you to hear some Cannibal Corpse, couple of Cannibal Corpse songs, and I can tell you like why I think it's unique, why just why it's so good. I mean, there's a song called "Skewered from Ear to Eye" off their Evisceration Plague album, and it's weird because I'd listen to it over and over again, and it's like I couldn't place what it sounded like. And then I finally figured out like the song that it sounded like, and it was an old who's the jazz guy? It was actually the same riff. You could actually overlay it with this jazz standard from Dave Brubeck. You know who Brubeck is, right?
No, I don't.
He's just like one of the originators of like one of the originators in the jazz scene, and it's the song is called Blue Rondo a la Turk. But I swear to God that Cannibal Corpse is Skewered from Ear to Eye is influenced by that song, and I'm like, that's really cool. That's really interesting because like the time signature and kind of the way it circles back on itself is really, to me, like really original sounding. I'm like, well, that's great. Yeah, maybe some of their songs are kind of more throw together riffs, but I think a lot of times, there's always at least a few songs on every Cannibal album that's sort of a stand apart, where it's like.
See, this is where I think you and I differ, and a lot of people differ, because you're approaching music from a musician standpoint, and these guitar things to look out for, and these obscure jazz musicians that they may or may not be influencing this.
Mm-hmm.
But the average listener of death metal, they're just like, oh, hit me with something good. And after a while, it's the same shit. They're like, okay, I'm bored of this. So you need a band to like change it up. And that's where I come from, is like, I want to hear death metal, heavy pounding, fast, relentless shit. But at the same time, I don't want it to be just plain, boring, heavy pounding, relentless shit. You got to throw some other stuff there to make it a little bit unique,
Yeah.
So Swedish death metal was good, and Tomb did it great. Dismember came out, okay, that's cool. It's a little bit different, almost the same though. Mm-hmm. Unleashed came out, like, okay, well, they're Vikings, and but otherwise it still kind of sounds the same. And Grave, okay, they're really heavier still, even though that was impossible, I thought. But they're heavier, but they're kind of boring other than that after a while. And those are the big bands. And after that, you have all these other bands trying to do the same shit to sound the same.
Yeah.
But they had a few who dared to be different. And there was another band from Sweden, speaking of Swedish death metal, Therion. They were really great. They had their own different timing and signatures, if you like. And they had another band, the guys in Therion, called Carbonized, which was really crazy different. Like, you would love that band. I got to send that to you over Dropbox.
I've heard Carbonized.
Like, really just different timing signatures, different guitar sounds and tones, and different weird riffs. The drummer was always like doing this crazy, almost jazzy patterns, and using a lot of the hi-hat, like shit you never heard any other band do.
Yeah.
These guys were like never noticed, and like they were great. They were so good. And they only got weirder with time. Like their second and third records, you were like, what the fuck are these guys doing? It was like Painkiller. It was like out there. So there are things that are different, not too different. Like I said, with death metal, you got to keep it like in that.
It's got to stay death metal somehow.
And getting back to Carcass, that's kind of what happened. Is they lost me on Heartwork. It was just stripped down, like only one vocalist, Jeff Walker. The lyrics were totally changed about what they were singing about, more or less. Album cover was kind of generic and sterile to me.
Really?
And then the production was just clean, and they had two guitarists doing all these little flourishes and stuff that I didn't really care about in the first place. And they lost me, and then they started to go rock after that. And then right around that time too, Bill Steer, the guitarist of Carcass, also had another I think called Firebird, which
was Cream. Just blues rock.
Yeah, it was like Cream, and then the other guys, Ken and Jeff from Carcass, the drummer and the bass player, went on and did a band I think called Black Star Rising, which was also kind of just like a rockish kind of band, if I remember. And then Michael Lamont was in Arch Enemy, and that was his big band. And then he also was involved with Metalocalypse, that band, whatever they're called. They're not even a real band, but
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the Carcass, but like I said, going back to this new album by Carcass, Torn Arteries, that you made me listen to, I'm like, wow, this is actually pretty fucking good.
But I think Torn Arteries, though, is a logical progression from Heartwork, if you ask me.
It sounds like it, yeah, but I mean, like I said, for my there's a lot of older references thrown in there, like lyrically, as well as like Bill Steer's vocals have returned. There's some slight more dirty sound, like grindcore elements on there, so it's really back to their roots.
Well, it's interesting, like just as I was kind of over the past week listening to Carcass, I decided to listen to Swan Song again, and here's my prediction. Like, I don't know where Carcass fans are currently.
You're not like them. You said you had a prediction. That means you're a pre-dick.
I am. So here's my pre-dick. Like, I don't know where Carcass fans are currently stand on Swan Song, but I can guarantee you, like, in the near future, people are going to start rediscovering that album and see it as probably one of their best albums.
You are up in the fucking night, pal.
It's a great album.
You're trying to tell people how good Cold Lake by Celtic Frost is. You're never going to win that argument. No one will. Even the fans.
I'm joking about. I joke about the Cold Lake, but
I'm actually. You're serious.
I'm dead serious about this.
You and your friend Dustin are absolutely serious about Cold Lake. You're not fooling me. You like that shit because that's what you heard and that's what you were into at that time. You don't know their legacy from before. See, I'm the yin yang there. I'm like,
it's funny.
Circle the Tyrants. Now it's Cherry Orchards. What the fuck? Really?
It's funny because Cold Lake is actually not the first Celtic Frost album I listened to. The first one I listened to, I think, was almost the second most reviled album, and it might be a compilation. Maybe it's like best of album. Is it Parched and
Thirst, Am I, and Dying? That is like a best hit / throwaway track / cutting room floor album.
Yeah.
Features quite a bit of Cold Lake as well as Vanity Nemesis to follow up the Cold Lake, which I didn't really think was really much better than Cold Lake. And I don't know. Yeah, it was just.
So those are my two introductions to.
Well, yeah, I mean, for you, that's the band kind of in a way, but they have that legacy and all that other stuff. But as a guitarist, the guy who already listened to glam metal and your basic rock and prog stuff, of course you're going to like that stuff because in that way it's more conducive to those arenas. But if you go back and listen to Into the Pandemonium, for example, which isn't really loved by all the old Celtic Frost fans because it's so symphonic and so different, avant-garde, I actually really love that record. It's arguably one of my favorites, but it's so hard to pick a favorite because they were
all over the place.
And the funny thing about that is I mentioned the band called Therion from Sweden who played really good, unique death metal. It was still death metal, but their name Therion, of course, comes from To Mega Therion, the Celtic Frost album, which is really my favorite one. That's their album number 2. And they just started to experiment on there with like some noise effects, like guitars and like tape effects and piano strings and like timpani drums in their music, female vocals, French horns. And that's just a little bit of experimentation on that album. Like the next album, Into the Pandemonium, was crazy over the top. But anyway, Therion went from being a standard or sort of a standard death metal band to probably being. Have you heard Therion symphonic stuff?
No, but I mean, I have, but like not lately, and it was always kind of more of like passing. See, I'm not really a fan of symphonic
See, neither am
elements,
I, but Therion, what they
but
did
I
is,
would say weren't they the ones that kind of started basically symphonic metal, maybe?
well, they brought it out into the light. Celtic Frost did it way back in 1987 when they released Into the Pandemonium, and it was really good. It was really dark. Therion basically took that record and made that the template for what they wanted to do after they released 2 albums already that were solid death metal.
Mhm.
Then all of a sudden they started having all these experimentation elements in their music, and then they put out an album called Gegial. No, it was Theli. It was like that was the one where like the first song had like this choral vocal attack of like this opera, and like what the fuck. And for me, I liked it. It was powerful as fuck because I can appreciate classical, but a lot of people hated it. It's
Yeah.
like this isn't metal and all these people singing and what in symphonies. I'm like, no, this is fucking good. This is really good. And I think if Celtic Frost had gone on and not disintegrated after Into the Pandemonium, that's what they would be doing. And he's even said that. Tom Warrior has said that more or less. So
Yeah.
Therion really took it out and like made what would be like the continuance of what Celtic Frost was doing. But they were so stressed out, Frost at that time,
Mhm.
the label hated that record and they took off all the avant-garde tracks they could and presented it more or less as a thrash record, and all the reviews in the magazines were just bashing it. There was like one or two that kind of favored it, but most of them were like, what's this? It's something people, female singing and da da da, this isn't our old thrash band. And they got a lot of shit for it, and the band got torn apart because I guess the recording was so strenuous, and they were arguing about where to go, the direction. Plus, you had a European producer who was just trying to make it straight metal. The label head of Noise was like, "No, no, no, don't record that. Do this." And
Mm.
that's why he was threw his hands up in the air after that record and said, "Fuck it, I'm going to do this other album and just cut loose and do some shit." And they did a glam record. And God, he should have changed the name of the band and done a different project, but he didn't. But
Yeah,
anyway,
well, it seems like he eventually changed the name of the band. I mean, I haven't heard much Triptychon, but how would you compare that with Celtic Frost?
have you heard the last Celtic Frost album, Monotheist?
Not
When
that
they
I
got
can
back
really
together
remember.
back in the 2000s. It was pretty good. It was a very adequate apology for Cold Lake, I would say.
Hmm.
It was a little over the top, like with the doom metal. Like there were really long songs, and they were like really heavy chops, and it was like okay, it was a little overkill on that, but it was cool. It was like probably like a darker continuance of Celtic Frost, so it was pretty good overall. But Triptychon, because the band broke up again because of some internal conflict, which was just stupid, but he did
Oh,
Triptychon, and it sounds the same thing. Like he's trying to be as dark and as heavy as he can possibly be, and it just sounds like they're trying too hard to me. It's not bad, but it's really not engaging to me, and I think that's because Martin Ain, the bass player, didn't have his hands involved in it either, but also because it was just missing something. And
hmm.
those two together, it was like Lennon McCartney, Paul Simmons, or Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons. It was like they had that magic that really worked, you know. And that's another reason why I think that like Morbid Angel like may or may not be as effective to me because it's not David Vincent, Trey Azagtok. It's that other guy in Trey, and it's just one death metal band.
Well, yeah, there is, and
That's
and
I
it's
dissect my death metal like very minutely, and it matters to me. But then again, maybe it shouldn't. I don't know.
yeah. Well, there is something to say about like chemistry that certain players have, right? And it's usually that chemistry is from conflict. Is usually what's creating such great music. It's usually a result of a couple of members just totally butting heads. I mean, that's probably what makes those first, early Van Halen albums so electric, right? Because you had David Lee Roth and Eddie Van Halen just practically going to blows every time they're in the studio. But for whatever reason, it ends up creating like just this intense music.
So that's another one is Van Halen. Like I will always say, like 1978 Van Halen. That's it.
Hmm.
It'll never be better. And the 1984 record, I mean, that was okay, I guess. But yeah, I mean, but after that, like with Sammy Hagar, fuck no, fuck that shit. No fucking way. That's their Cold Lake. I'm out. Count me out on that. And same with
Yeah.
Kiss. You know, Kiss, 80s Kiss, when Ace and Peter left. Say what you will, yeah, they were drug addicts and like they didn't show up for practice or recording and they were always high and like, but that's rock and roll. But at the same time, that's what made Kiss great, was that sound, those four. With Bruce Kulick playing guitar, again, it was kind of sterile, antiseptic, just kind of by the numbers guitar playing. It didn't really speak to me, and their lyrics, their music, it was just generic, whatever Kiss, you know. And then they got, like a few albums later, they actually did a, what was it? What was that? Revenge? That was a pretty good album.
That was a good album, yeah.
And then they did a grunge album that called Carnival of Souls. That, you know, I'm not a big grunge fan, of course, but Kiss doing this heavy, dark music, it was really good.
Really?
Paul Stanley didn't agree with it because he said, "Well, we're not a dark, heavy band. We're not depressed. We love life. We're rich and we get fucked every day by hot girls." I'm like, "Well, yeah, but the music's cool. I like that music." But then they reunited with Ace and Peter after that. So, and just as quickly they disbanded again with those guys. But
what did you listen to, like the last last two Kiss albums? What was it? Sonic Boom, and then
I
wasn't there
bought
another?
Sonic Boom, and I was like, "This is fucking garbage. The songs are stupid, and Paul's voice is fucking gone. I'm sorry. He just needs to fucking suck it up and just face fact. It's done.
Yeah, that's
It's trash. I'm sorry."
that's sad because, like, honestly, for that style of music, dude, especially during when they're kind of at their peak, there was not a better vocalist than Paul Stanley.
At his peak, I think like live, like he was a little overkill. I thought, whoa, 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 whoa.
Oh yeah, but like from a studio, like his voice is just.
But no, his voice is done, man. It's been done for a while, but on that Sonic Boom record, I hadn't even heard the controversy yet of his voice, but I was like, what is wrong with his voice? It sounds all raspy and just like it's just not there. It's almost like this is a practice. Like, what is this? And I'm like, guess this is it, you know? And
it's sad, man, because
I started like to Eddie Trunk, and Eddie Trunk is very critical of Paul's vocals, and like they use backmasking and backtracks like in live, and he hates that. And I'm like, well, yeah, you can't sing, so they're doing it. He's like, well, then they need to hang it up. You know, it's like, why charge people like exorbitant fees to come see you live and you're not really playing? I'm like, yeah, exactly.
It's sad because his voice is like that because he was just pushing it to the limit.
Well, I can't imagine
that sound, you know, like he was so on top of his game, you know, that he blew it out, you know. But I don't know. That's one of those things. It's like, I don't know if he still wants to sing. Like, I don't know. You love to do it. It sucks if you can't sing the way you used to. But if you still like a musician still has that urge to perform, even if they can't do it.
You know, you can't do it. He's got a Motown band on the side too, and he's trying to sing that kind of stuff. I'm like, dude, you can't do it. I'm sorry. I'm a Kiss fan. I love Kiss, but you know, sorry, it's over, dude. You gotta take up painting, keep painting or acting in the Phantom of the Opera play. I mean, he does a lot of shit. You know, it's just.
Well, you got to sing in Phantom of the Opera, don't you?
Yeah, I guess he does. Huh? Never mind. But, you can do a movie of it. But Gene Simmons was actually picking up some of the Paul Stanley songs and singing them live.
Really?
So yeah, I mean, I don't know what's going on right now with Kiss. I guess they're still touring. I mean, fuck.
Yeah, this might be their. I mean, this is supposedly for real their last tour, but.
Yeah, but it's been going on for like how many fucking years now? It's like, and they're doing it with those two imposters, and yes, they are imposters. Like, fuck off. I don't care. Fight me, buddy. Oh, let me guess. You like them? Really?
Yeah, I like Eric Singer, dude. I've always been a fan of
Eric Singer. He's a good drummer and everything, and Tommy Thayer. I mean, he, you know, but he was a roadie.
I was never a huge like Black and Blue fan or anything, but like Eric Singer's played on some of my favorite albums, like those Badlands albums with Jakey Lee.
Well, I'm not saying Eric Singer's a bad guy. He's a likable guy, and he's a good drummer, and he did some good stuff with Kiss when they had their makeup off. But the whole idea of masquerading, we're not going to get into this. This is like 5 whole shows worth of stuff here. Let's not even turn this rock over. But actually, speaking of drummers, like let's get back to Carcass. As I was going to say, another reason why it's a little hard for me to get into Carcass, and this is just superfluous, but Ken Owen's not the drummer anymore, and he was always like one of the
Well, he
There was
can't
no
play.
guys. Yeah, I know he can't play, but from what I know, he was trying to play drums again, but after having a stroke. But yeah, I mean, the drummer they have is great, you know, so there's no doubt about it. But I mean, yeah, this is kind of sad. I just miss Ken Owen. That was Carcass to me, was this powerful three piece. And as I'm sure you know and agree with me, like three piece bands are awesome.
Oh yeah, dude.
Like Rush,
Carcass,
Raven, Korn,
Corner,
Kill,
Rush,
Lost,
Triumph,
Triumph
Voivod.
was
I
Voivod wasn't a are they a three piece now?
don't know if they are now, but they were for the longest time, or they were for a little while anyway. Or were they? Hold on.
I don't know. I don't think so. Maybe they were, but
No, they weren't actually. That was
they had
my
quite a
fault.
bit of guitar stuff to take up, you know, after Piggy left us.
Yeah, well, and their guitar player they have now, like Piggy is like a hard guy to replace. That's another one of those things. Like he's so unique of a player that it's just like, how do you replace him? And that guy they got, I can't think of his name right off the top of my head, but he totally just nails it, dude. Like he's like the embodiment like of Piggy's spirit. So I'm very happy with the way Voivod has continued on, which that's one of those things where it's like they shouldn't technically be able to keep going because Piggy was such a unique player, but their new guy, oh, what is his name? Oh, Mongrain, Dan Mongrain, I think. Just he was from a band called Martyr, from Canada, like a technical death metal band. He's fantastic.
I remember that band.
Yeah, you should really check. Like, I don't know. I mean, you were never really a huge Voivod fan, but I was. You know,
I
and
got their first four records. That was about it. I dabbled in like one or two after that, but I was like, you know, once you're in the death metal, like Voivod, Sans, Piggy, it was just like, you know. I wasn't really that into them. You know, I bought Killing Technology first. I thought that was a weird record because I was expecting this wall of guitar. Everybody talks about Voivod like they're this brutal, heavy thrash band, and they really weren't. They were,
no,
but
they're
that
kind of
guitar
like the
was really
King
weird. It
Crimson of
caught me up.
thrash.
I'm like, what is that? That's like a weird, punky, like new wavy
Mhm.
guitar, but it's in metal. Like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah,
And it grew
yeah.
on me, but like the first Voivod record, More in Pain, and like the Roar album, those were okay, but they kind of didn't really blow me away. But the one I really liked, and this is gonna really fuck you up, is Dimension
Oh,
Hatros, the fourth one that had all those
I
weird
love that album. Are you kidding
abstract
me?
like guitar and like concepts, and I was ready for
Oh,
it
okay.
at that
So,
time because I'd already got thrash in me and I was getting it out of my system, so to speak, because I was going through the American bands and the Voivod was there. I'm like, well, that album's really weird. It's different.
that
Like lyrics are different, the art is different. They're so unique and their sound. They like that song with the guitar where it's all wah 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 wah, like it's talking. Like that was cool. I like, wow, this is a really cool album, you know. And
no, and I'll tell you what, dude. Like that's my favorite like little era of Voivod is starting from Dimension Hatros to Nothing Face, and then
I didn't like
favorite.
nothing. It's not at all.
My favorite is
Good
Outer
kidding.
Limits. Believe it or not,
Is what?
Outer Limits.
I haven't heard anything past Nothing Face really. I think I bought Negatron once and I listened to it and I was like, it's okay. But at that point I was like way in the
An
depth of
Angel Rat.
I just wasn't gonna do it. Yeah, I never heard that one. I always heard bad things about it from the other DJs back in the day, but
It's a good one. It was produced by Terry Brown from who produced all the Rush albums, the classic Rush albums.
well, there you go. Three piece from Canada.
There you go.
My favorite one from them is probably Killing Technology, but I like to mention Hatros. But yeah, I was never.
Mine would be a toss up probably between Nothing Face and Outer Limits. But once again, that's like that's their peak prog, you know, albums.
Their peak prog, huh? And what do you think
Peak
Carcass
prog.
peak prog is?
I would
Artwork?
say Heartwork. So kind of going back to Carcass, I think Heartwork, believe it or not, that's when you listen to like all their albums from like the first one to up to Heartwork, like it makes total sense where they're leading up to because every album progresses closer almost like splits the difference all the way to Carcass Heartwork.
I'm good.
And that's why I think Swan Song is going to be actually looked back on, and like I said, it's going to be pretty quick too. I would say in the next
No, I see.
few years, people are going to rediscover that album and say
I think
that
people.
is
I
a
think
great
all
album.
tech heads that like Heartwork are going to go back and rediscover Symphonies of Sickness, but I highly doubt that.
I can't get past like the sound is unlistenable. Symphonies is
No, not the first album, Symphonies of Sickness, their second record.
oh, I was
The
thinking of
first
Reek.
album, the one you didn't like with the horrible sound and the really fast grindcore song. I told you
Although it does have a very compelling story, like you said, someone spilling coffee on the 2-inch.
Yeah, well, it actually says that in like I think it says it in the record, or I read it in an interview somewhere. But Carcass to me, like, here's the thing too. This is again the America versus Europe argument, or not versus so much, but for me, is at that time everybody over here is like they don't have the concept. Not most Americans that are into thrash don't have the concept of I'm gonna go, and this is before the internet, everybody. Like they don't have this idea of I'm going to go to this local punk record store in a seedy part of town and sift through all these records and find a new band to like. People don't do that. They just go
No.
to a record store and see what they see. And oh, this is on Roadrunner, the same label that has Sepultura. Like, who's this? Deicide? I'll buy that. Or that kind of shit. Or they hear it because the band comes with a bigger band, and then they're into it. But for Carcass, it was so weird to me. It was so unique and so interesting because you had to kind of figure out who they were back then. And they
Yeah,
were
there's
spawns out of Napalm Death. So I had the Napalm Death record, which at the time was way too punk for me, and grindcore wasn't quite out yet. But I was reading the thank you list. I'm like, Carcass. There's another band called Carcass. And then I remember Brad from Raunch, where I bought my records at the time, had a radio show where I would then be doing my radio show following him that night. He played Carcass, Axe Grinder, and Doom, three bands from the UK that all play more or less hardcore, like grindcore and punk. And he said the names of the bands, but I couldn't figure out who was who. So I went and bought all three records by all three bands because I liked everything I'd heard. The one I really liked was Carcass, and that was the third one I got. And I'm like, well, where's that one I heard? That's the one I want. And it ended up being Carcass. And I was like, holy shit. And then I realized it was the same guitarist of Napalm Death and this other guy. And then one of the band members had dreadlocks. The other guy had short hair. I'm like, what the fuck? Then the album cover, you're like, what is going on with this band? Holy shit. And
it was groundbreaking.
And then you bought the Grind Crusher compilation that came out, and you heard Bolt Thrower and Terrorizer and Morbid Angel, and like you're like, what is going on in the UK? Holy shit! And everybody over here is just like Angel of Death, for like the umpteenth time. Like, okay, you keep doing it.
Yeah, but you know what? Okay, I'll say this about I've always, if you know
and
me,
Metallica
this.
is like "And Justice for All." I'm like, you guys are over here listening to the song "One" by Metallica, and you're telling me that's hot. And there's this band Carcass in the UK. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And that's where I split off from everybody and have that lovely attitude that you love me for today.
I got to admit, man, it's starting to get a little tedious.
Oh, really?
No, about Angel of Death. Here's just
gloss
something
it over.
I just want something that you'll disagree with me on. I think that breakdown riff in Angel of Death is still to this day one of the most sinister pieces of music ever recorded.
You mean the
That is so fucking evil. I don't know what it is about that riff. It just makes me want to kill. Like, I mean,
I guess whatever floats your boat. Because I had a friend who told me he had a Bathory record on one night and he fell asleep to it, the second Bathory LP, and he heard this riff, and it was just dun 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 dun. And he said it scared him so bad that he woke up. It made him feel uneasy. I was like, really? That song?
And that's something that like I gotta admit, like that's something I'm always, I used to try to find it a little bit more, but I'm always pleasantly surprised when I can hear like a riff that genuinely makes me feel a little uneasy, or makes me feel like it's actually coming from like some sort of weird ancient, like evil place. You know what I mean? And I would
You
say
need
that.
to Waits again then, because Rain and
Who?
Blood to me was like such a hardcore punk album by Slayer. Um, the riffing didn't really figure into that at all for me. But Hell Awaits, you have a lot of deep, dark, heavy riffs as well
Oh
as
yeah, yeah. For
like
sure.
Sleep or Necrophiliac or Praise of Death is always a really dark song to me. That or not Praise of Death, but that's a good song too. But Crypts of Eternity on Hell Awaits by Slayer. It's
Yeah.
like a slow song on side two. It's like it's super dour and depressing. And also because when I first heard it, it was winter in Utah. It was like a gray, dismal, just snowy, gray, dead tree winter for like
Mhm.
months and months. And that song came on. I was looking out my window, and ever since then, that song reminds me of just dismal gray winter and like how depressing
Yeah.
it can be. And that song is just the riffs and the
Yeah.
melancholy guitar playing and
It's just
so.
so dark. But I would say, like I said, like
They're
the
from
Angel
L.A.
of Death. Yeah, it was weird, sunny LA.
Happy
And
Sunshine.
so like that riff, there's only a handful of riffs that really kind of just be like, "Ooh my God," like they're channeling something else out there, you know. And I would say actually, God of Emptiness. There's a few Morbid Angel riffs that do that
That's a
for me, but
good song
God of
by.
Emptiness.
That's funny by bringing up God of Emptiness by Morbid Angel because that's on their third/fourth album. If
Yeah,
you count
Covenant.
Abominations as their first one, which it technically is, then that's their fourth record, Covenant. And that one's actually a return to form for Morbid Angel, going back to the sounds on Abominations, like shorter, faster, a little bit more roughly produced songs.
Mhm.
They lost like all of the artistic flair of like the what's the other one? Blessed Are the Sick. Like that one had a lot more like elements in it, like flutes and acoustic guitar.
Mhm.
But they went back to their roots on that record. But then all of a sudden, you have this keyboard track, and then boom, God of Emptiness comes on. This slow, heavy, like mid-tempo
Yeah,
metal thing, and all of a sudden, the next album is like that. So that's
it's
cool.
so slow. There's something about that riff. Once again, it just seems like it's coming
That's
from.
Vincent right there. I can't see what's his face doing that with Morbid Angel. And the children come to me. It's
Well,
like
and that's the thing. He doesn't sing the he sings it straight death style all the way through, which is kind of
yeah, that's like Cannibal Corpse doing Zero the Hero with straight death metal vocals. It's like why?
I
And Hope once did a cover of Twisted Sister, Captain Howdy. I think that's my favorite Twisted Sister song. And they're just, I'm like, okay, why do it? It just sounds like a stupid barking death metal song.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things of death metal. Like that's one of the identifiers of a death metal band is having a death metal vocalist.
Well,
Very
yeah,
rarely.
if you're gonna do a throwaway cover song, then fucking do it right, man. Like if you're gonna bark it out death metal style, why do it unless it really enhances the experience, which it didn't in both those cases. But Morbid
My
Angel, that was cool. Like God of Emptiness was a really interesting song, and I never knew
It
there was a
really was.
until I saw it on Beavis and fucking Butthead. I was like, oh wow, there's a video for this.
Which is weird because they're making fun of that video, but if you watch it without them like shitting on it, it's a cool video, dude. Like it holds up. Like
Yeah,
it doesn't seem cheesy at all, really.
the
Even
guy
the
turning into
effects.
all of that. That was the coolest fuck video, but you never see it.
Yeah.
Like MTV just didn't play heavy shit back then, and once in a while you'd watch all 3 hours of Headbangers Ball, and it would be the last fucking video you'd see.
Yeah. But like not many bands could really do that. But I will say like I'd argue that Cannibal Corpse will sometimes do that on their breakdowns where I'm like, this is just such an aggressive sounding riff, and I don't know why, but like you actually feel it like physically, where you're just like you almost like feel your face getting flushed, like fuck, I hope somebody fucks with me right now because I will literally kill him, like I don't
You
know.
say Cannibal Corpse made you angry?
Yeah, I mean it makes me feel sometimes they have these riffs that tap into like just like an aggressive feeling that like sometimes I forget is there, like once again, like showing you the shadow self, right? Like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, I'm ready to kick someone's ass right now, and I'm normally not like this. But
Well, it's funny because there are certain songs I have that like engage me like beyond like personal choice of not shaking my head up and down really violently and smacking my brain against the inside of my skull, which is bad.
Yeah.
There are certain songs that force me to do that because they're so heavy and like make me headbang. And one of those
Yeah.
is from the Celtic Frost album, Monotheist, or Monotheist if you like, Monotheist. But that song is called Ground. It's track number 2. It's like a really heavy, slow, like it's really good.
Ground.
Total headbanging heavy metal song, but it's Celtic Frost. A few other
Okay.
ones like that, I'd say like uh, Grave, You'll Never See. Like again, that's an anomaly because most of Grave stuff to me kind of sounds the samey. It's heavy, but
Hmm.
that one has really good riffing on it. It's like this really heavy, choppy, like going up and down the scale, like dun 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 dun. Then it gets faster with the double bass with the drums. It's like certain songs just grab you and throw you in like that. And
Yeah.
again, American death metal doesn't do that for me so much because
That's
it's
weird.
just so much about soloing, and it's like people showing off their fretboard shit. I'm like,
I don't hear that, and I think it because oddly the reason I like the American death metal is because I hear more of those grooves. You know what I mean? Where yeah, they might be playing a million miles an hour, and then they kind of bring it down to like a mid pace, just like chunk, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's it, that's the stuff. But it's usually I don't know because I mean I don't like to hear a lot of solos in death metal, so I don't I don't know what death metal bands are just playing nothing but solos. I mean, there's those tech bands that I call it arpeggio metal because it's just nothing but like sweep arpeggios, high notes. I'm like,
yeah,
ah,
that's what a
this
lot of
doesn't do it for
bands.
me.
What do you think
But
about Dying Fetus?
I like that because they at least bring it. You know, they do a lot of that whittly stuff, but they at least usually kind of have a bedrock of just a massive like riff. You know what I mean? Like a really good, just chunky riff, you know, which I once again, it's like that's what I love. I love chunk. I love chunky riffs, and that's another
Well,
reason why I think I prefer American death metal over Swedish death metal because that that you know that boss metal zone pedal sound of Swedish death metal takes away the chunk. Like it makes it just more of a like
like the fuzzy grind noise.
yeah, I don't like fuzz. I like chunk where they hit that palmy and it's just not you know what I mean?
You need to listen to the Monotheist album by Celtic Frost because that thing is like it's like a huge chunk of like hard to digest fudge that's going to give you indigestion no matter what. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just really heavy, super sludgy, like super thick. It's like really, it's like and they do really long songs that are like kind of drawn out. So it's a really doom metalish album, but like done like in a not doom metal style. It's just it's weird. It's
Monotheist.
yeah, they came back together umpteen years later, did that record with Paul McCartney, Tom Warrior, Martin Ain, the original two from the band, and then they had some nondescript guy on drums and guitar. And they did it with Peter Tägtgren of Hypocrisy fame in his Abyss Studios, who produced it. And there were a couple of black metal people who had a little bit of a few cameos on there, like the guy from Satyricon and one of the guys from Cadaver, and I think Dark Throne were there maybe, but that album it was like I said a very adequate apology for Cold Lake, I guess. But unfortunately, they broke up again, and now Martin Ain's dead, and that leaves us with Triptychon, which it's kind of the same thing as that album, but it's kind of just something missing. You know, I hate to say it. I mean, it's
Mm.
good thematically for what it is, but it's just not really not the same.
I might have to visit uh, some of that Celtic Frost, particularly Return to Megatherion and Monotheist. Like you're I want to see what you're listening to.
Megatherion my favorite, and then that's the bridge one between the symphonic record, which is Into the Pandemonium, their last one before they kind of imploded, did Cold Lake. But Into the Pandemonium is really good. because it's so dark. It's a conceptual album, but they have a song. It's like a drum breakbeat, drum and bass song, kind of. It's called "One in Their Pride." It's about NASA, but it's just the drum going. It's like a staccato beat. That's all it is, with like a little bit of violin in the background. So that was really weird, especially for a metal band to do. And then they had the symphonic stuff, but the album starts off with a cover of Mexican Radio by Wall of Voodoo.
Yeah, I have heard him do that.
Like, what were they thinking? What kind of drugs was he doing? Because, like, goddamn, Mexican Radio, and then it's like deep, dark, swelling symphonic doom metal album. There's like a breakbeat song, and then you have this other song that's like someone playing a violin with the girl singing in French over it, and then there's like a metal version of the same song without the girl. It's like, what? Wow. And they do a Frank Sinatra cover that appeared on the CD. So yeah, it's crazy days for the Frost. But
all right, so I'll tell you what. Like, how about for our next episode, I will listen to. I'll listen to those two albums. I'll listen to all three. I'll listen to Monotheist, Into Pandemonium, and Return to Megatherion. I'll give you my thoughts. And then you got to listen to the most recent Morbid Angel album.
I will do so.
And then possibly Formula's Fatal to the Flesh. Wait, no. Gateways to Annihilation.
I used to own Formulas. I did not like it. I've heard Heretics, same thing, same exact thing, and same with Gateways. It was all just. I mean, I'll listen to them again, but I'm thinking I'm going to hear Immolation. So.
Well, so you know you're not listening to Immolation, just throw a dart at an Immolation song after you listen to them, and you'll know, dude. There's nothing that makes them.
I mean, not that the European bands, they didn't have their samey sounding stuff. I mean, there was Sick Grave kind of got a little bit monotonous after a while, and it's hard to say. Maybe you could regard Torn Arteries as Carcass's apology for Heartwork, even though they love that album, but I don't.
Once again, I hear that more of a logical next step from Heartwork. Like, it has the Heartwork foundation still.
I need to go back and listen to Heartwork, so I'm going to do that and the new Morbid Angel one. I'll do that.
Okay. All right.
But yeah, maybe I'm being extremely unfair to Heartwork. I feel like I probably am after all these years, but Swan Song, I'm going to have to say, not so much. But
no, you don't have to. But I once again, I just have that prediction. I could be wrong, but I think people are going to start regarding that album as a classic fairly soon.
I don't know. That was their throwaway contract killing album, and like even the label and the band were like, no, whatever.
Which is weird to me. If their throwaway album is that good, it tells you what.
But there are a lot of bands, there are a lot of albums out there like that. Like, I've always laughed at seeing Extreme 2 Porno Graffiti on the racks of record stores for years, and I saw you posting it on Facebook one time about how good that was.
Oh, it's amazing.
And I was like, what? Get out of here.
Yeah, that's such a good album. He's one of my favorite guitar players of all time. It's NOOOO. He's hottest. He's NOOOO Betancourt.
I know that name.
That's the guitar player for Extreme.
Weren't they in the decline of Western civilization, the metal years?
No.
I thought they were.
No.
I'm pretty sure there was a band called Extreme in that movie, wasn't there? Or am I thinking of something else?
Probably something else. I don't think there was a band called Extreme. I think there was Odin, Wasp.
I know Odin was in there. That was like the big shit band in there, which, okay, nobody knew who the fuck they were. Some big band on the LA scene. Like, fuck LA. Who gives a fuck about LA?
I don't know. The guitar player for Odin is also an Armored Saint. And Armored Saint's good.
Well, Armored Saint's good.
Yeah. And that's members of Odin.
Well, actually, here's one for you. Like, let's go all the way across the country since we're on this old metal trip for just a second here. Armored Saint was good. I think Sabotage was way better.
Oh, yeah. Love Sabotage, dude.
And Sabotage is arguably the first band that used keyboards in their music all the time. Like the
first metal band. The first real, metal band, possibly.
Like a good dark metal band, not Ozzy or something. but like a
Yeah,
real
yeah,
good,
yeah.
solid heavy metal band. Like Sabotage, The Dungeons Are Calling is easily one of my favorite heavy metal records of all time as well. That's such a good
That's amazing,
record.
dude. I was heartbroken when Chris Oliva died, but I would argue that they helped the Florida death metal scene too. I mean, that's their
They
Florida band.
probably, I mean, they were probably hugely inspirational. And also, there's actually footage of Obituary playing By the Grace of the Witch and Visions of Hell with John Oliva singing
Yeah,
at a live show somewhere down there in Florida. But yeah, Sabotage was fucking dark as shit. I even liked Gutter Ballet, even though that was like a rock ballad album.
uh-huh.
So when they started to really go over the top with that kind of stuff. But
Yeah, they really started to become like rock opera type songs.
yeah,
But
I checked out at
Streets,
that point. But
yeah, you might, I'm not saying you got to do this, but you should revisit, like, if you revisited everything from like Edge of Thorns on back, I think you'd be pleasantly surprised. It's still solid,
I
solid
have
metal.
everything from Dungeons Are Calling all the way up to Hall of the Mountain King. That's usually about where I stay.
So you got 3 albums.
Well, I like
It's like
Siren.
everything in between Hall of the Mount King and Dungeons Are Calling.
Well, maybe I'm wrong, but it's like Sirens, Fight for the Rock,
Oh yeah, there's
or
some.
Power of the Night, not Fight for the Rock. Fight for the Rock was like their kind of commercial, but so Sirens, Dungeons Are Calling, which is my favorite, and then Power of the Night, Hall of the Mountain King. Those are the four I have. I used to have Gutter Ballet or whatever that one was, but I kind of yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean they got into kind of like an opera, rock opera sort of thing, very Broadway sounding almost, but it's still good. Like Streets is still good, um, and yeah, Gutter Ballet, and then Edge of Thorns, where they had a different singer. That's when they got Zach Stevens singing. That's a really great album. That's one of my favorite albums ever.
All right, so we'll be back
Next week,
with more metal talk.
probably. Like, no, you got to listen again, man.
Have you ever heard Cyanide? They're American, but they don't sound anything like any of those other bands.
I haven't heard cyanide. Well, I mean, I eat cyanide. It's good for you.
This band Cyanide, not with a Y, with an I, but they're like they're actually almost a Sabbath-inspired death metal band. They have a really bassy, heavy sound, but kind of doomy, but they're a good heavy death.
I don't know, man. I don't know about like that bass heavy stuff. We're gonna figure each other out, man.
Oh, I'm an
Yeah.
anomaly. People think I hate everything, and I talk like I do, but I really don't. You just have to
I
find
know.
out. Like,
It was like we need to crack that so as people start thinking that you like everything.
oh, I love lots of stuff. You just no one asked me what it is. They're just pissed off because I don't.
I'm gonna get you to see. I'm gonna get you to see
Black
what.
Sabbath. Whoa!
Yeah, I'm gonna get you to hear what I hear, like when with certain bands, like whether it's Cannibal or later Morbid Angels. Well, we'll start with the later Morbid Angels. Once again, you're gonna have that under your belt.
Well, you went with Carcass, I mean, I was expecting to not like Torn Arteries, but I did like it.
Yeah,
I'm willing to go back and listen to Heartwork again just to make sure that I don't hate it or do hate it or not. But
yeah, give it a shot. I think yeah, you'll find that you've grown as a person. You've matured.
I may have actually.
You haven't matured. You've matured. That's how mature you are.
Oh wow, you're saying it like you're a funny old Englishman who's waiting for his Grey Poupon to be handed out the limousine window.
Yes, indeed.
All right, we'll be
All right,
back
brother.
next week, and then
Yeah, and I guess the topic will be probably a little bit more of the same. Kind of all over the place, but yeah.
all right. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna stop recording.
Okay.